right. All right, all right, all right. Okay. So, ladies and jelly spoons, how's it going? Okay. So, how's it going? Pretty good? Any questions about your third assignment? I'm going to try and give you your essays as soon as possible. But are there any, have you started thinking about your third assignment? It's November what, 2nd or something?
Yes, that's November.
Yeah. I want to give you 2 weeks and then try to, give you feedback as soon as possible. All right. So I've been thinking a lot, and even though we're doing Western history, and even though there are 3 big schools of thought that are typically associated with, the dominant schools of ethics, I just have to reconsider only covering, nothing but virtue ethics and deontology and consequentialism, because there are some absolutely stellar, outstanding traditions out there that are amazing. How many of you have heard of Zen Buddhism? Zen Buddhism? Yeah, that's the kind of Buddhism. Hey, Dante. Zen Buddhism is the kind of Buddhism that, is popular in Asia, in particular Japan and some parts of China. And Zen Buddhism is basically a combination of Taoism and Buddhism. And what you get in the combination of those two is something so amazing that I just have to share it with you. Like, I can't do a course on ethics and only focus on, virtue ethics and deontology, especially since deontology and consequentialism are just 200 years old. Zen Buddhism is like 2,500 years old, older than Christianity. And so I just wouldn't be doing you a disservice if I didn't give you these other worldviews that are available. So that combined with the fact that I don't want to only be the only one talking every class, and I wanted to share with you some other people and what they have to say about certain ideas and things like that. I decided that today I'm going to show you a couple of video clips on YouTube, and I'm going to give you some taste of different aspects of ethics. We're going to start off with a clip about Buddhism. It's going to only be about 16 minutes, and then we'll discuss it, and then we'll go to a clip about a kind of ethical philosophy I call minimalism, half ethical, half economic. And this is something I find really entertaining on YouTube, but it will push the envelope about what you think a philosophy is and what an ethics is. I think that he's an amateur, he's not a professor, but there's no need to be snobbish. I mean, the common man also has ethics and philosophy too. So I'm going to share that with you and let you know that there are resources out there and communities out there of people called minimalists. And that's an entire philosophy that's economic and ethical at the same time. And then we're going to move on. I'm going to share with you a little clip about one of the moral issues that we face in our current time. And then lastly, I'm going to share with you a little something to show you that philosophers are not perfect. And a lot of them adopt the mentalities of their age. And you can see why I see that, why I say that towards the end. So we have an hour and 15 minutes. I think we can cover all that. If we cover it and have 10 minutes of discussion, I think that'll take the whole time. So that's the agenda for today. A little bit of entertainment, a little bit of YouTube, and then some discussion. It's all about ethics, but I think it'll be a little break, a little different from what we've been doing so far, and I think you're going to enjoy it. But the first thing I want to do is in honor of humanizing philosophers, showing their human side, their flaws, their time-bound, the fact that they're bound to a certain zeitgeist, a certain time. I have to share with you something from two philosophers who I adore, but nevertheless, there are certain harsh realities we have to face. All right, let's read this from David Hume. David Hume. All right, so there was a little excerpt on David Hume from something he wrote in 1752. Mind you, David Hume, writing in 1752, this is dead center of what is called the Enlightenment. Okay. The Enlightenment is a period where people are supposed to get enlightened, right? Amazing. You're supposed to get enlightened during the Enlightenment. You're supposed to guide your life using light. Get out of the darkness. Get woke. And in certain respects, the Enlightenment was woke. They pushed religion aside, especially superstition, and they tried to replace it with evidence, reason. And in those more abstract things, they did very well. But when it came to more cultural things, the status of women, the status of minorities, the status of those indigenous people who we're colonizing, and the status of imperialism, those don't often get criticized as much as you might think from a rational, enlightened philosopher. So I just really have to expose this side of philosophy because I don't cancel people like that. I still love all of these philosophers, but I think that they're flawed, and they're beautifully flawed, and we need to hold them up as examples of their humanity, the humanity of philosophers. So I'm going to read this to you. He's writing, this is David Hume. Remember David Hume? Do you remember us talking about David Hume? He was known during his time as Le Bon David, a refined gentleman, very humane, never losing his temper, always getting around with everyone, no? This guy even wrote some really nice essay that I love, where he says, basically, civilization is not possible without women. Women are the ones who refine our manners, refine our conversation, and in the most polite society, it's always women who lead the salons and the clubs and all of the associations that take technical knowledge and humanize it and make it beautiful and elegant. So with respect to women, I think he's spot on. That is enlightened. But I'm going to share with you something that, I don't know, we can talk about a little bit. So here's David Hume in 1752. I am apt to suspect the Negroes to be naturally inferior to the whites. There never was a civilized nation of any other complexion than white, nor even any individual eminent either in action or speculation. No ingenious manufacturer amongst them, no arts, no sciences. On the other hand, the most rude and barbarous of the whites, such as the ancient German, the present Tartars, still have something eminent about them, and their valor, form of government, or some other particular. Such a uniform and constant difference could not happen in so many countries and ages if nature had not made an original distinction betwixt these breeds of men. Not to mention our colonies, There are Negro slaves dispersed all over Europe, of whom none ever discovered any symptoms of ingenuity. Though low people without education will start up amongst us and distinguish themselves in every profession. In Jamaica, indeed, they talk of one Negro as a man of parts and learning, but it is likely he is admired for slender accomplishments, like a parrot who speaks a few words plainly. I find this extremely amusing. This is the same person who told us about the problem of induction, right? Remember what the problem of induction was? It's basically, given a certain sample size, on what conditions can you generalize about that entire population of zebra if you've only seen 5? And that was how he crucified the rationalists, right? But when it comes to his prejudices, he doesn't seem so methodical or so logical. I wonder how many Negroes, it's not clear from this how many Negroes he's actually seen. He's probably heard about a couple of them. I think anthropology was still a young science at that point. So it's interesting to process. I don't even know. How do you process this statement? Would you say this is a racist remark, or how do you process this? It's in 1752 by a Scottish philosopher. I don't even know how many, I don't know whether there was slavery in Scotland. I don't know whether there was slavery of Negroes in Scotland at that time. I don't know when anthropology was born, but I know that anthropology was primarily born in the West as a way to study foreign cultures, right? So it's just, I saw this just to humanize these philosophers, right? They are human. But when you think about the word racist, that's a remark that gets thrown around very easily these days. What do you think when you see a remark like that? Is that an ignorant remark rather than a racist one? Is this a racist remark? Do you think he hates Negroes? Do you think he has contempt for them? Are they just easily dismissed? Or is he just ignorant? Or he doesn't honor the principles of his own philosophy of empiricism and the burden that comes with induction, right? Because he can't make a deductive argument to be Negro is to be ignorant. You can't define a Negro into ignorance. So the only other type of argument you can do must be some sort of inductive reasoning, right? It must be, you're saying, okay, it can't be a matter of definition, right? Because all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, Socrates is mortal. All Negroes are ignorant. This Negro in front of me is ignorant, therefore, no, yeah, I don't know. I don't see him doing it deductively. You just can't define it, right? You have to observe. Intelligence is something that has to be observed.
It sounds surprisingly like opinionated rather than a logical argument.
Yes, I would agree. Totally. He's sharing his biases, his prejudices. It's just an opinion. I mean, I suspect, I'm apt to suspect.
Like he says about the Tartars having their valor of government and some other particular, well, he doesn't even try to compare it to any, like, I don't know, African society or something like that.
Exactly.
But if they have that,
But that's what I'm wondering. Like, I'm wondering, the universities at that time, did they have departments dedicated to study? You know what I mean? I just don't know. I know there was no internet, right? So, I don't know. This is a generalization. It seems to me this is like one of those places where you as an individual might be very refined, but at some point your local culture, your contemporary culture, it just overrides all that refinement, all that discipline you had. And here we have this blatant, blunt, prejudice and bias. At least that's how I see it. I would be fascinated to know what you see. So this is David Hume, and we're going to look at one other example. Yeah. All right, so this is Kant. Remember, Kant came after Hume. Kant reacted against Hume and said, wait a minute, I love philosophy. Hume is throwing away the baby with the bathwater. Yes, we need to reform metaphysics, but even though metaphysics will never be a science like physics and chemistry and art, and physics and chemistry and biology and mathematics, there's still something there, you know? So Kant tries to save philosophy, even though Hume woke him up, honestly. Because before, Kant just followed Leibniz blindly. Now, Kant is very, again, just an amazing, amazing thinker. But let's read together. If we examine the relation of the sexes in these parts of the world, we find that the European alone has found the secret of decorating with so many flowers the sensual charm of a mighty inclination, and of interlacing it with so much morality that he has not only extremely elevated its agreeableness, but also has made it very decorous. The inhabitant of the Orient is of a very false taste in this respect, since he has no concept of the morally beautiful, which can be united with this impulse. He loses even the worth of the sensual enjoyment, and his harem is a constant source of unrest. He thrives on all sorts of amorous grotesqueries, among which the imaginary jewel is only the foremost, which he seeks to safeguard above all else, whose whole worth consists only in smashing it, and of which one in our part of the world generally entertains much malicious doubt, and yet to whose preservation he makes use of very unjust and often loathsome means. Hence, a woman is always in a prison, whether she may be a maid or have a barbaric, good for nothing, and always suspicious husband. In the lands of the black, what better can one expect than what is found prevailing, namely the feminine sex in the deepest slavery? A despairing man is always a strict master over anyone weaker. Just as with us, that man is always a tyrant in the kitchen who outside his own house hardly dares to look anyone in the face. Of course, Father Labat reports that a Negro carpenter, whom he reproached for haughty treatment towards his wives, answered, "You whites are indeed fools, for first you make great concessions to your wives, and afterward you complain when they drive you mad." And I love this last sentence. And it might be that there was something in this which perhaps deserved to be considered. Listen to this. But in short, this fellow was quite black from head to foot, a clear proof that what he said was stupid. I mean, is that reasoning? How did he get from the fact that he's black from head to foot to the fact that, what did he say? But in short, this fellow was quite black from head to foot, a clear proof that what he said was stupid. Is that deductive or inductive? Or is it just bias? I don't know. These are human beings, my friend. That's all I'm trying to say. Sometimes they're going to show their humanity and their flaws in their religion and in their hatred of other religions. Sometimes it's going to be in how they treat other genders. Sometimes it's going to be other races. Sometimes it'll be aristocratic versus, patrician versus plebeian values. This is what it is to be human. You can try to have objectivity. You can do some critical thinking, but you're human, These are excellent human beings. Excellent, but they're not perfect, I'm just exposing you to it, In all fairness, I love them. I read them all the time, over and over and over again. But I don't do this to cancel them. I want people to read them even more. It's just, we're human beings, So this is just a little glimpse at a cross-section of a period in history which claimed to be enlightened, pursuing enlightenment. And it did that in certain respects, right? But then what about the other respects? Are you really enlightened if you're making this kind of remark? Are you really enlightened if you're institutionalizing and pursuing policies and laws that embody the sentiment, you know? Whether it's colonialism, imperialism, whatever. So I'm starting with the race issue. I'm saving another philosopher who I love dearly for the last video I'm going to show you. He's going to make a couple of interesting remarks about women. Anyway, anyone want to make any remarks about this before we move on to the videos? Final closing remarks? Are you surprised? I mean, he's from Scotland. I don't know if he's ever left Glasgow or not. I don't know. I don't think David Hume traveled a lot. Certainly Kant never traveled. So yeah, I mean, if you have a lot of book knowledge, it doesn't necessarily carry over to real world experience, you know? I mean, right now, I think most big universities are automatically a multicultural experience. You will get exposed to people from other places. But both Kant and Hume studied at university. How many black people do you think were their classmates? How many women do you think were their classmates? We're limited by the time we're born in. All of that abstract stuff, you can achieve it, but we've already seen the rationalists do that all the time. Socrates can define everything he wants. Definitions are cheap. You can't discover much that way. That's how rationalism fails. You see what I'm saying? It's exposure. But you're limited, no matter how much you want exposure, no matter how much exposure you get, you can't time travel, right? So the only amount of exposure you're going to get is in your own time. So for some people, your limits are going to show up by you saying, Jesus is the only Lord and Master of the universe. Everything else is false prophecy. For another person, they're going to say, the truly superior sex is the masculine sex. Is that an eternal truth, or is that a very local, time-bound prejudice? You see what I'm saying? Same with race, same with class, same with ability. You get the point, right? That's all I'm trying to say, man. I would love to spend a whole semester on, consequentialism, but there are other more urgent things that you need to see. It's just more important that you see this. All right, so let's go to the YouTube video. Yay, YouTube. All right, Buddhist ethics, all right? So there's a really cool Zen master on YouTube I've discovered. His name is Leo Gura. He's an American of Russian descent. And he has, he studies Zen Buddhism.
I honestly
and
can't
it's really
believe
interesting to watch him evolve over the years. This is a clip from 6 years ago, I think 2014.
Hey, this is Leo for Actual.
And I'm gonna play it, and I want to discuss it because Buddhism is sometimes treated as a religion, sometimes as a philosophy, right? But I want to tell you that one of the distinctive things about Buddhism is that even though people show signs of affection for the Buddha and for images of the Buddha, that's almost religious. At the end of the day, at its core, I think it's an ethic. It's a metaphysics and an ethic. And its metaphysics ratifies or reinforces its ethics. And you're going to see why when this thing completes playing. But I just want you to think about what he's talking about. He's saying, what is ego? How your ego dictates your life. When he stops speaking, we're going to discuss this. And I just want you to pay attention to the ethical aspects of what he's talking about, okay? All right, here we go. So let's start again. All right. Let me adjust the volume. Okay.
Hey, this is Leo for Actualized.org. And in this video, we're going to talk about what is ego. Let's talk a little bit about what ego is. I'm sure you've heard about it. I'm sure you've heard people talking about the problems that the ego can cause for you. You've probably heard about ego death. You've probably heard about both positive and negative sides of ego. So let's talk about ego, and specifically, let's talk about how you can understand this concept and relate it to success and personal development, how to get more success in your life by understanding ego. All right, so what is ego? Ego is basically that aspect of yourself that you consider you. So that is when I say you, and I say your name, and you think, yeah, that's me. That is ego. Ego is basically your self-image of who you are. So ego is a complex construct in your mind. It's sitting both at the conscious and very, very deep subconscious level. So ego is that I that you think you are. It's the thoughts and the emotions that you are identified with. It's the beliefs that you think are rock solid and completely true. It's what you think reality is like. So that whole construct, and it is a very big and deep construct. It's like a gigantic iceberg, and only the tip of it, like the 10% of it is sticking out of the water, and the other 90% are all submerged, and really you don't know what they are. It's just operating, it's just working. So the ego is you, and the ego has a couple of features that it does. So the ego, the fundamental thing that the ego does is that it separates itself from everything else that's out in the world. So if you're coming from the ego, and this is 99.999% of people, including myself, is what you do is you say, okay, this is me, and everything else you look at as not you, right? That desk is not you. That other person is not you. That other country is not you. So you are very distinct. You are just your mind and your body, this skin that you've got, and everything beyond your skin is something else. So you have that very clear separation. This is something that you get as a biological entity, as an organism who needs to survive and depends on survival and reproduction. And so we as a species, and really every living organism, has a sense of this sense of I-ness, this sense of this is me, this is what's really, really important, and the other stuff, not so important. Sure, you can love your spouse, and you can love your kids, and you can love the business that you built, and you can even love your iPod or your iPhone, but there's still a big difference between that and really being identified with yourself. So the ego is that identification with yourself. Now, why are we even talking about ego? What's the big deal? Okay, so it seems that this is kind of an intuitive notion. Well, the problem there is that the ego is very clingy, and the ego is very self-preservational. And so what it does, especially if you're trying to get to higher levels of achievement and success and consciousness in your life, is that the ego tends to hold you back because it's got a lot of inertia and weight to it. And it doesn't always want to go out there and explore reality for what it really is. Because what's happened is that ego has been built up, regardless of how attached you are to yourself right now. The fact is that you and your notion of you is highly, highly illusory and fictitious. And I know you don't want to hear that. And I don't want to hear it. The ego doesn't want to hear it. But it's a very arbitrary way in which the ego came about. It just came about through the experiences that you had in your early childhood and then early adulthood all the way up to now. And every experience that you had through your whole life from birth to this current day, this current second, has added something to your ego. And what it's created is this giant yarn ball of all these different strands, all tightly interwoven. And now it's like an object. It's like a thing. It's got its own mass to it. And it's hard to reorganize that. It's hard to go in there and pull a strand out and create something actually useful out of it, something that's going to get you a better level of performance. And so that's what a lot of personal development is about working with your ego. Because if your ego is too big, and that's what we say when we say someone, yeah, he's got a really big ego. What does that usually mean? That means, yeah, he's a jackass, he's stubborn, he's not open-minded, right? And that's kind of what it is, but that's very surface level understanding of ego. A much deeper understanding of ego is that you've got these beliefs, and you've got this big network, this ball of yarn, and that is responsible for all your behaviors, all your actions, all your beliefs, all your thoughts. And this is a very arbitrary thing. Even though we think that this is so precious that we can't change it, that if we changed our most cherished beliefs, then something horrible would happen, the world would collapse. And in reality, what happens is that the world would not collapse. Only your ego would collapse. And what would happen is that your ego would evolve to a higher level of consciousness, to a new state. And in that new state, if you do this process correctly, then that ego will be lessened. It will be less judgmental. It will have less boundary between itself and the rest of the world. It'll be more calm. It'll be less neurotic. It'll be more comfortable, and it'll be in a position to perform better. So you get better results out of your life when you numb that ego down and you rub it out and you kill it. And the ultimate end of this is the process and the state of enlightenment, which you can reach and which Buddhist monks, for example, reach after decades of meditation and contemplation, is that what happens is through a very rigorous training process, they literally numbed down their ego so much that they dissolve it, and they no longer have that boundary between themselves and the rest of the world. And they feel a sense of oneness that we can't even imagine. I have not gone through this process, although this is something that I'm working on actively right now. It's going to take me some time to get to where I want to be there, but they've gone through this process, and so now they have a sense of oneness with the world, with the universe. And that's what they talk about, oneness, that one-pointed mind, that enlightened Buddha mind. It's that you are no longer distinct from anything else. You see yourself as part of everything else, connected to everything else. And you no longer judge things as good and bad. And you no longer cling to your beliefs so much. And you no longer resist suffering. And you no longer resist pain. You just kind of go with the flow. And when you do that, well, you get a tremendous sense of personal power, control over yourself, emotional stability, because nothing can shake you. Because what do you care? You are one with the world. Literally, you do not care because you see as everything being part of you. You see you being part of everything else. So there is no good and bad. There is nothing that needs to be corrected. There is nothing that is distinct from you. Your body getting cut or even death is not a big deal because you're just part of the system. This is kind of a deep, deep, deep notion. The first time you hear about it, you might think that's kind of wacky, kind of far out there and metaphysical, and not really the thing for me. But the fact is that this is what happens. It's just that most people, this happens to everybody, I would argue. It's just that most people do not reach that complete state of enlightenment. What happens, though, is that throughout your life, whether you even undertake this process or you don't, you're going to be forced to adjust your ego to the circumstances that are happening to you. Except what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of resistance. So for example, maybe you have a horrible breakup, you have a divorce, and that just has a big traumatic scar on you, on your ego. And now your ego has had to change to adapt to that pressure that was put on it. Or maybe you do meditation, and meditation makes you feel, you do a little bit of meditation every day, and that meditation makes you feel a little bit more calm, a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more connected to the world. You're not completely connected. You've still got your ego, but it's a little bit rubbed out. It's a little bit numbed down. And so through this kind of process of just living life and learning about life and experiencing the ups and the downs, your ego kind of evolves. And it goes from the kind of ego that it was when you were a kid. Basically, it was all me, yelling at your mom to come help you, to come give you some assistance, give you some pleasure, give you some safety and some comfort, kind of going away from that and becoming more responsible, more independent, more open-minded. And slowly, as you're exposed to more experiences in life, you become more and more open-minded. And you start to see that good and bad is really a more relative thing than you ever thought it was. And as you're getting that notion, and your ego is kind of expanding out and it's dissolving, you start to notice that it's easier to control yourself. You start to notice you're not so neurotic, you're not so anxious, you're not so worried all the time. Your thoughts do not have a grasp over you. Maybe you don't identify with certain thoughts the way that you used to in the past, simply because you've suffered too much from that. I mean, and that's basically what Buddhist monks do, is they sit for hours and hours every day for tens and tens of years until eventually they kind of just, their ego just kind of like it crumbles under its own weight. And then they get this relief. But I think all of us are going through that process. This is a gradual process that you go through. And so that is basically what ego is. And I think that, all of us, mortals, unless we're Buddhist monks, all of us mortals, have a really strong sense of ego. And I'm not really expecting you to go out there and to solve that problem right now. I just want you to be aware of it. I want you to understand how judgmental you are. This is huge. How many judgments are you making per day? Track this. Just spend a day monitoring how much you're judging things. And by judging, I simply mean putting a value on it. Because there's two ways to go about life. One way, and it's a spectrum, but we're going to talk about the two poles of this spectrum, the two ends. One end is where everything is judged according to some sort of metric, some sort of value. So everything I look at, I'm like the Terminator. I'm scanning it, and I have like a target in my mind, and this target is saying, target acquired, good, bad, do this, do that. That's one way. The other way is to just be in life, be totally in the moment, and everything's okay. Nothing is bad, nothing is good, everything just is. It's being, right? Those are the two far ends of the spectrum. And most of us are somewhere in the middle, although I would argue much, much further towards this scanning and judging type of mindset. And in this scanning and judging mindset, everything that you're looking at, you're judging and you're evaluating. You know, oh, he didn't do that. Oh, he just threw a cigarette butt out the window. He's littering. That's bad. Oh, she told me that she didn't like my shirt. She was rude. That's bad. Or it's like, oh, she didn't approve of me because of what I said. That's bad. Or, oh, he did something here, which is good. And we go through our whole day and our whole week and our whole life like this, judging. Everything has some sort of purpose. Things that happen to us that are favorable to our ego, we love, and we're excited and happy about. And the things that are unfavorable, we're depressed about, we're miserable about, we're frustrated about. And so what happens is that we go through life in this up and down, playing this up and down game, this whole game of chasing after things that are good and avoiding the things that are bad. And as your ego is dissolved and you see yourself as more part of the whole universe and just start to take in the being and be more in the present moment, then you start to disidentify with that and you move away from the judgment and you become more at peace, more calm, more your natural you. You raise your level of consciousness. So that's ultimately what ego is about. It's about raising your level of consciousness. I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm signing off. Please, this is a very deep and fascinating topic. Leave me your comments. Also, like this and share this. That's why I release this content for free. And then, of course, if your curiosity is piqued by this and you want more tips, techniques, and strategies for how to work with your ego and how to really shape it into something that makes you a really happy, awesome, successful kind of life, then check out actualize.org, because there I have a lot of exclusive content. I update it weekly with free videos similar to this one. You can go and sign up to my newsletter there. It's free, and you will get them every week.
Okay. So when I introduced ethics, I introduced it as a branch of axiology that's concerned with how we determine things like good and bad, right and wrong. But that's a very Western perspective, right? Because it presupposes that there are things that are good and bad, right and wrong. And you're just picking which system assigns those values properly. You see that? That's what I introduced from a Western perspective. But you see, from the East, first of all, did that sound like a religion to you? What you heard? Dante?
In a way, I think it's spiritual.
Well, did he mention God even once? Okay. So even if it's a religion, it's not a theistic religion, right? It's not a God or. I'm not saying that there aren't certain Buddhists who believe in God. I'm not saying there aren't certain shrines in Thailand where they chant and jump around. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, for the most part, when it's understood at its most esoteric, deepest level, it's not really about God. It's not really about religion. Okay. So that's the first thing. I think this is an ethics. This is ethics, but it's not going to fit into that story I told about ethics earlier about figuring out good and bad. Why? What would he say that his intention with this idea of assigning values to everything. There's something very clear that he said that if we call what he said ethics, it's not about getting better and better and more precise in your judgments of good and bad and right and wrong. Something he said that's completely contradicts that. So if he's doing ethics, it's a very different ethics. What did he say that's in conflict?
Do that if you do conflict up and down. Try to live with the past.
Exactly, it's the opposite. Instead of getting better and better and better at judging, no, move away from judgment. Freedom from judgment. That's really helpful. Because, and this is related to Stoicism, an ancient philosophy in the West before Christianity took power. Freedom from judgment. Freedom from your reactions, automatic reactions. Freedom from feelings and reflexes. That's true ethics. For the Stoics and for the Buddhists. They're going to articulate it differently. But this sense of being free from passion, suffering, feeling, all of that messy, judgmental, reactive stuff, that's what they associate with being ethical. Let me build on something you said. Let's say you're a dignified person. You consider yourself very righteous, very successful, right? That's ego. What I just said is exactly what ego is. I am a middle class man. First of all, that's already some ego there. I am a middle class man. I am married. I'm not like those people who are unmarried or divorced. I am a man, I'm not some woman. I am Latino, Irish. I am Latino. That's who I am. You see where I'm going with this? All this identity, remember he said, we think that our identity is rock solid, something like God, unchangeable, necessary, and preordained by God himself, nature, right? Something utterly unshakable. But he said, no, it's arbitrary. And this gets into existentialism, guys. Who are you? Right? How much of you is your race? How much of you is your gender? How much of you is your current socioeconomic class? How much of you is your marital status? How much of you is your sexual orientation? Is there a you? Is there an ego? These are deep questions. And he used the word metaphysics once. He used it only once, but it's at the basis of what he's talking about. Because if I can demonstrate or even suggest to you that there are no boundaries between you and everything else at a metaphysical level, then I have just abolished your ego. And that will start off intellectually, right? Like, hey, I'm no different from anything else. But your reflexes will still be unconsciously acting. And it will take time for those to dissolve and decay. You see where he's going with that? And he said there are two ways. If you're a Buddhist monk, you meditate and you constantly identify yourself with the world until you become so liberated, so conscious of your identity with everything, that once you're re-immersed back in society and you're going through the ups and downs of life, it becomes like Spinoza. Yes, you can't control what's going to happen, but you don't need to if you're truly free. Because what hurts you is not the circumstance, your reaction to it. And once you have freedom from those reactions and emotions, feelings, now you can just be a surfer guy. Or what's it, Tony Hawk? You can just do your thing. You can play along with life. You can accompany. No religion, not really God-oriented, but there is a role for you to play if you're a Buddhist monk. Meditation, practices like detachment from things, right? Not getting too attached to any romantic partner, not getting too attached to any culture, not getting attached to any geographical location. You see, you're almost like one of those Jedi Knights, right? Don't marry, don't have a house, nothing. Yoda didn't own anything. And Anakin shouldn't have owned anything either, but he met a beautiful lady, and he started having nightmares about his mom, and that corrupted him, and he turned into Darth Vader eventually. And honestly, the Sith are just complete egoists, right? That's the Sith. But we don't have to go into that universe. I just want to build on this. I am a married man. I'm not like those failures called divorcees. 2 years from now, my wife leaves me, right? Okay. So the Buddhist monk, that path, discipline, constantly disowning things, detaching, so that eventually, since you don't own anything, well, the loss of anything stops bothering you. And it even goes to your limbs. You can reach a level where you're indifferent to that. Same with the Stoics. Something powerful is happening there. But that's through discipline and devotion to the ethic. But what this guy is saying that's really profound is, even us normal people, we get we travel along that route, but only 40% maybe. Why? Enlightenment is a complete Zen experience. Zen means you're so in the moment, you're so anchored in the current moment that you don't desire to be in the future or in the past or anywhere else. Wherever nature or God has distributed you, you're perfectly fine with that. You see what I'm saying? That is like Zen consciousness. To be Zen is like, okay, the news just forecast a hurricane coming next week. I'm chill. It's fine. Doesn't mean you won't prepare, doesn't mean you feel that. It just means that your emotions aren't turbulent. It's kind of like with Spinoza. I think you're more conscious of your anger and your temper and your fear and your ambition. And when you become conscious of them, you begin to care for them and nurture them and dissolve them slowly. And you can become a person who's non-reactive, easygoing, a Californian, laid back. And actually, when the hippies began in the beatniks, they were reading a lot of Buddhist stuff, and a lot of existentialism too. Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, people like that. Lots of poetry too, and drugs. All right, so the point is, guys, I would be doing you a disservice just talk only about consequentialism and deontology. All of that is great. Those are excellent frameworks. There are objections and replies and all that. But if I didn't show you this, surely I would be leaving out something very, very fundamental. Instead of ethics being about dodging consequences or introspecting about motives or perfecting excellence with all virtues, this is another way, which is all about diminishing the ego, diminishing desire, diminishing possession, diminishing attachments, until you reach a point where you're zen. You're just like, no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. You know? Freedom from being pathetic is what it is to be ethical. The word pathetic, we use it in our word to mean something like, oh, he's pathetic, he's pitiful, like, oh, you're so pathetic. But that word originally meant anything that is pathetic is something that is suffering. That's what pathetic originally means. It doesn't mean pitiful and contemptible. It means suffering. Patheia is Greek, it means suffering. Ethos, on the other hand, means character. So, to be ethical in the strictest sense, according to ancient Greeks, when you're ethical, you're in your character, in your natural energy, where you are in control of yourself and you go with the flow of life. You're in the present moment, you're composed. You know, composure, how you're composure. That's to be ethical. So the enemy of the ethical is the pathetic, where you're like angry or sad or infatuated
or, oh my God, there's an election in 1 week and it's jumping up and down. Anything that gets you off center, that's the kind of thing that is an enemy to being truly ethical from the Stoic and from the Buddhist perspective. Very different and much simpler. Again, no God, you don't need God's grace or things like that. But meditating on things like that is good, and it's not bad. But at the end of the day, you can just detach from those things you identify most with. I am a married man. That's what I am. I am African American. That is me. You see, all of that creates a tension. Right? You're setting up artificial, arbitrary tensions that came from just nothing. The fact that you were born a certain place. The fact that your first language was a certain language. You know what I mean? All this arbitrary stuff that you say this is necessarily me. Well, life will show you some things. If you're a middle class man now, after a recession, you might be janitor. You see what's going to happen? That's that turbulence he was talking about. You might think you're religious now, maybe you think you're Muslim now, but then you meet a beautiful woman who's, I don't know, Taoist or something, I don't know. You fall head over heels. Now what? She's not going into heaven because your pastor said so, or there's some book that you follow. Your heart will surrender, and now your ego will have to evolve again. And he mentioned the word consciousness, right? You're becoming more and more conscious of the world and its identity with you. Because remember, that tension you were creating was like, oh, I'm a Methodist, I'm not a Mormon. That's that judgment he was talking about. Remember the Terminator? Everywhere you look, judgment. That creates neurotic. That creates so much tension, you're gonna be neurotic. You're tiptoeing through life, trying to dodge things, and I'm not that, and I'm not this. You're gonna drive yourself crazy. Instead, you start at the opposite side with the metaphysics that really there are no boundaries between me and anything else. No boundaries. There are no boundaries. I am not anything separate from anything else. That's liberating from metaphysics. But it has psychological effects. It gets rid of the pathetic part of you, the pathos, suffering, feelings. And then you can be stoic, you can be Buddhist, you can be Zen. You go through life and you have a central identity, but it's so weak, it's so diluted that it's accommodated, it goes with the flow. So if you find yourself in Afghanistan, you'll eat food with them, you'll fellowship with them, you'll have no problem identifying with them. Hey man, there's no difference between me and you. Yesterday I worshiped at my synagogue, and now I'm eating meals with you and praising Allah. And you just don't judge. It's not that you stand in one corner and don't judge. No, the opposite. You're active. You're not passive, you're active. Why? Because there's no judgment. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, no judgment doesn't mean withdrawal. Doesn't mean stay like that. That's not, no, it's the opposite. Because there's no judgment, I, the Zen Christ, am hanging out with prostitutes and then Pharisees and then children and do something, spontaneity, freedom. It's the Pharisees who are neurotic, right? Well, what are we going to do about this guy? He's walking around forgiving prostitutes. No, that's the neurotic ones. You see what? They're judging everything. I hope you see the point. Any questions? Anything you want to bring up? Yeah, go ahead, Doctor.
I was wondering about the mind one talking about like oneness.
Yeah. Yeah, this is metaphysics, guys. Now, it's not so much that idealism is right, materialism is wrong, because I would say that Buddhists are more idealist, but that's, again, this is the tip of the iceberg. At the end of the day, nirvana, metaphysically, nirvana is nothing. It's just that our minds create the illusion that there's something. And they do that because of the ego. The ego
lose this sense of self and honor. But on a metaphysical level, we're constantly separating ourselves from other things. But at the deepest level of understanding, how would you demonstrate the boundaries and everything else? You're constantly respiring. The respiratory system is fully integrated with the atmosphere. You drink in fluids, you consume food. You're constantly taking in the rest of nature. What is it? Is it your skin? We can find elements on the periodic table that can fully identify your skin, right? So I don't think that's an objection. Where do you begin and where does nature end? And then this thing called the mind, no one has seen it. It might be an activity, but it's a metaphysical activity. You know what I'm saying? Let's move on, guys. There's more stuff. All right. Okay. So check him out. He has really good videos. But we must move on. Now, how much time do we have? 20 minutes? Okay. All right. I think I know where we'll go. We're going to go to one of my favorite philosophers. Let's hear what a philosopher has to say about women, guys. This is going to be fun.
This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Studies in Pessimism by Arthur Schopenhauer. Chapter 7 of Women. Schiller's poem in honor of women, Würde der Frauen, is the result of much careful thought, and it appeals to the reader by its antithetic style and its use of contrast. But as an expression of the true praise which should be accorded to them, it is, I think, inferior to these few words of Joyce. Without women, the beginning of our life would be helpless, the middle devoid of pleasure, and the end of consolation. The same thing is more feelingly expressed by Byron in Sardanapalus. The very first of human life must spring from woman's breast. Your first small words are taught you from her lips. Your first tears quenched by her, and your last sighs, too often, breathed out in a woman's hearing, when men have shrunk from the ignoble care of watching the last hour of him who led them. Act 1, Scene 2. These two passages indicate the right standpoint for the appreciation of women. You need only look at the way in which she is formed to see that woman is not meant to undergo great labor, whether of the mind or of the body. She pays the debt of life not by what she does, but by what she suffers, by the pains of childbearing and the care for the child, and by submission to her husband, to whom she should be a patient and cheering companion. The keenest sorrows and joys are not for her, nor is she called upon to display a great deal of strength. The current of her life should be more gentle, peaceful, and trivial than man's, without being essentially happier or unhappier. Women are directly fitted for acting as the nurses and teachers of our early childhood by the fact that they are themselves childish, frivolous, and short-sighted. In a word, they are big children all their life long, a kind of intermediate stage between the child and the full-grown man, who is man in the strict sense of the word. See how a girl will fondle a child for days together, dance with it, and sing to it, and then think what a man, with the best will in the world, could do if he were put in her place. With young girls, nature seems to have had in view what, in the language of drama, is called a striking effect, as for a few years she dowers them with a wealth of beauty and is lavish in her gift of charm, at the expense of all the rest of their life, so that during those years they may capture the fantasy of some man to such a degree that he is hurried away into undertaking the honorable care of them, in some form or another, as long as they live, a step for which there would not appear to be any sufficient warranty if reason alone directed his thoughts. Accordingly, nature has equipped woman, as she does all her creatures, with the weapons and implements requisite for the safeguarding of her existence, and for just as long as it is necessary for her to have them. Here, as elsewhere, nature proceeds with her usual economy, for just as the female ant, after fecundation, loses her wings, which are then superfluous, nay, actually a danger to the business of breeding, so, after giving birth to one or two children, a woman generally loses her beauty, probably indeed for similar reasons. And so we find that young girls in their hearts look upon domestic affairs or work of any kind as of secondary importance, if not actually as a mere jest. The only business that really claims their earnest attention is love, making conquests and everything connected with this, dress, dancing, and so on. A nobler and more perfect a thing is, the later and slower it is in arriving at maturity. A man reaches the maturity of his reasoning powers and mental faculties hardly before the age of 28. A woman at 18. And then, too, in the case of woman, it is only reason of a sort, very niggard in its dimensions. That is why women remain children their whole life long, never seeing anything but what is quite close to them, cleaving to the present moment, taking appearance for reality, and preferring trifles to matters of the first importance. For it is by virtue of his reasoning faculty that man does not live in the present only, like the brute, but looks about him, and considers the past and the future, and this is the origin of prudence, as well as of that care and anxiety which so many people exhibit. Both the advantages and the disadvantages which this involves are shared in by the woman to a smaller extent, because of her weaker power of reasoning. She may, in fact, be described as intellectually short-sighted, because while she has an intuitive understanding of what lies quite close to her, her field of vision is narrow and does not reach to what is remote, so that things which are absent or past or to come have much less effect on women than upon men. This is the reason why women are more often inclined to be extravagant, and sometimes carry their inclination to a length that borders upon madness. In their hearts, women think that it is men's business to earn money and theirs to spend it, if possible during their husband's life, but at any rate after his death. The very fact that their husband hands them over his earnings for purposes of housekeeping strengthens them in this belief. However many disadvantages all this may involve, there is at least this to be said in its favor, that the woman lives more in the present than the man, and that, if the present is at all tolerable, she enjoys it more eagerly. This is the main source of that cheerfulness which is peculiar to women, fitting her to amuse man in his hours of recreation, and, in case of need, to console him when he is borne down by the weight of his cares. It is by no means a bad plan to consult women in matters of difficulty, as the Germans used to do in ancient times, for their way of looking at things is quite different from ours, chiefly in the fact that they like to take the shortest way to their goal, and in general manage to fix their eyes upon what lies before them, while we, as a rule, see far beyond it, just because it is in front of our noses. In cases like this, we need to be brought back to the right standpoint, so as to recover the near and simple view. Then, again, women are decidedly more sober in their judgment than we are, so that they do not see more in things than is really there, whilst, if our passions are aroused, we are apt to see things in an exaggerated way, or imagine what does not exist. The weakness of their reasoning faculty also explains why it is that women show more sympathy for the unfortunate than men do, and so treat them with more kindness and interest, and why it is that, on the contrary, they are inferior to men in point of justice, and less honorable and conscientious. For it is just because their reasoning power is weak that present circumstances have such a hold over them, and those concrete things which lie directly before their eyes exercise a power which is seldom counteracted to any extent by abstract principles of thought, by fixed rules of conduct, firm resolutions, or, in general, by consideration for the past and the future, or regard for what is absent and remote. Accordingly, they possess the first and main elements that go to make a virtuous character, but they are deficient in those secondary qualities, which are often a necessary instrument in the formation of it. Footnote. In this respect, they may be compared to an animal organism which contains a liver but no gallbladder. Here, let me refer to what I have said in my treatise on the Foundations of Morals, section 17. End footnote. Hence, it will be found that the fundamental fault of the female character is that it has no sense of justice. This is mainly due to the fact, already mentioned, that women are defective in the powers of reasoning and deliberation, but it is also traceable to the position which nature has assigned to them as the weaker sex. They are dependent not upon strength, but upon craft, and hence their instinctive capacity for cunning and their ineradicable tendency to say what is not true. For, as lions are provided with claws and teeth, and elephants and boars with tusks, bulls with horns, and cuttlefish with its clouds of inky fluid, so nature has equipped woman for her defense and protection with the arts of dissimulation, and all the power which nature has conferred upon man in the shape of physical strength and reason has been bestowed upon woman in this form. Hence, dissimulation is innate in women, and almost as much a quality of the stupid as of the clever. It is as natural for them to make use of it on every occasion as it is for those animals to employ their means of defense when they are attacked. They have a feeling that, in doing so, they are only within their rights. Therefore, a woman who is perfectly truthful and not given to dissimulation is perhaps an impossibility, and for this very reason, they are so quick at seeing through dissimulation in others that it is not a wise thing to attempt it with them. But this fundamental defect which I have stated, with all that it entails, gives rise to falsity, faithlessness, treachery, ingratitude, and so on. Perjury in a court of justice is more often committed by women than by men. It may indeed be generally questioned whether women ought to be sworn in at all. From time to time, one finds repeated cases everywhere of ladies who want for nothing, taking things from shop counters when no one is looking, and making off with them. Nature has appointed that the propagation of the species shall be the business of men who are young, strong, and handsome, so that the race may not degenerate. This is the firm will and purpose of nature in regard to the species, and it finds its expression in the passions of women. There is no law that is older or more powerful than this. Woe, then, to the man who sets up claims and interests that will conflict with it. Whatever he may say and do, they will be unmercifully crushed at the first serious encounter. For the innate rule that governs women's conduct, though it is secret and unformulated, nay, unconscious in its working, is this: we are justified in deceiving those who think they have acquired rights over the species by paying little attention to the individual, that is, to us. The Constitution, and therefore the welfare of the species, have been placed in our hands and committed to our care through the control we obtain over the next generation, which proceeds from us. Let us discharge our duties conscientiously. But women have no abstract knowledge of this leading principle. They are conscious of it only as a concrete fact, and they have no other method of giving expression to it than the way in which they act when the opportunity arrives. And then their conscience does not trouble them so much as we fancy. For in the darkest recesses of their heart, they are aware that in committing a breach of their duty towards the individual, they have all the better fulfilled their duty towards the species, which is infinitely greater. And since women exist in the main solely for the propagation of the species and are not destined for anything else, they live as a rule more for the species than for the individual, and in their hearts take the affairs of the species more seriously than those of the individual. This gives their whole life and being a certain levity. The general bent of their character is in a direction fundamentally different from that of man, and it is This which produces that discord in married life, which is so frequent and almost the normal state. The natural feeling between men is mere indifference, but between women it is actual enmity. The reason for this is that trade jealousy, odium figulinum, which, in the case of men, does not go beyond the confines of their own particular pursuit, but with women embraces the whole sex, since they have only one kind of business. Even when they meet in the street, women look at one another like gulfs and ghibellines. And it is a patent fact that when two women first make acquaintance with each other, they behave with more constraint and dissimulation than two men would show in a like case. And hence it is that an exchange of compliments between two women is a much more ridiculous proceeding than between two men. Further, whilst a man will, as a general rule, always preserve a certain amount of consideration and humanity in speaking to others, even to those who are in a very inferior position, it is intolerable to see how proudly and disdainfully a fine lady will generally behave towards one who is in a lower social rank. I do not mean a woman who is in her service, whenever she speaks to her. The reason of this may be that with women, differences of rank are much more precarious.
Okay. Remember I said that when Hitler came to power, he was philosophizing about race a lot. Do you remember that? Philosophizing about women has gone on a long, long time. I mean, I don't know, like the Hebrew Bible doesn't really philosophize about them, but there are symbolic things in it. There are certain, suggestions about their status. Now, what he's doing is he's kind of like synthesizing all of that and rationalizing it and making it seem eternal, platonic. But those are the prejudices of his time. And quite frankly, I think those prejudices are still with us today. Things like the Me Too movement, all the feminism we see, some stuff we see with Black Lives Matter. The reason I played you that is just to let you know that this is a great philosopher, great philosopher. German philosophers from the earlier part of the 1800s, and he influenced Nietzsche a lot. But yeah, I mean, what did you hear? Was that true? Was that fact? Was that opinion? Was that bias? I mean, he was philosophizing. This is what women essentially are. They're substance, blah, blah, blah. And all you can expect from this is blah, blah, blah. And this is the reason why blah, blah, blah. Right.
It's funny because the first two things about other races you showed us a philosopher, and this one all have the same underlying language. Kind of sounds like they're referring to it as something like not holy. Not just
Absolutely. That's in some other imagery. Underdevelopment and otherness. Very good, Sarah. Excellent. Underdevelopment and otherness. Very, very good. Very, very good. And so it's understandable that as we evolve as a species and our culture becomes more fair and liberal and equal, certain men and certain races and certain classes are going to get their up there. Start judging. They're like threatening, right? There are entire communities online called red pill communities, big cow. These are men who feel threatened by feminism, and so they react and they say, no, we're for men's rights. And it's really sad on the whole spectrum, from people who react against women by saying, we're going to be pickup artists. You know what a pickup artist is? Pickup artists, like how to pick up women. So they're just going to master all the strategies and tactics. You've got entire channels on YouTube dedicated to teaching impressionable young men how to, be a player, how to get as many women as possible. Cheap stuff. I slept with 100 women last year. Here's how you think it is. You got that. Then you got your more like, I'm divorced, and you probably are too. So, us men, let's get together. The custody battles are against us. The alimony payments are against us. The child support payments are against us. So it's not about picking up women and all that. It's rather like, let's show some solidarity and let's try and change the laws in our favor. And then you've got like the extreme for like people who are coming on this side, and they just philosophize about women, and they're dedicated to never dating women, never getting into long-term relationships with women, definitely never marrying women. And I guess just trying to dignify themselves by distancing themselves from women. Guys, I just had to expose you to this because this is ethics too, right? Judging women, judging who they are, judging their place in society. I mean, he's not using the word bad, because it's pretty clear that he thinks women are pretty bad. Not bad in the sense of evil, but bad in the sense of just contemptible, and we're stuck with them, and why do they have to be the ones who give birth? That's his attitude, right? That's how he's coming across, right? The real geniuses, the real men, are geniuses who occur every generation in a very rare amount. And they're individuals, and they stand out. So the real history of the species starts with Aristotle, and then it goes to Galileo, and then Newton, and then Einstein. That's the real history, full of men who are great. And he thinks he's one of them, right? That's what he's going to call the real history of the species, which is of the greatest individuals. But then there's everybody else, and yes, my mom technically gave birth to me. And she cares about the species. She cares about us. He had a very bad relationship with his mom. And she was a socialite. She hosted events. She had Goethe and other great thinkers and scholars visiting her home. And she was entertaining them. So they're kind of envious or whatever. So any thoughts before you finish? I'm very curious to know what you think. I think Sarah hit it on the head. Otherness plus just immaturity and underdevelopment. Man in the fullest potential of man is a white Anglo-Saxon male from the 19th century, according to that, who philosophizes about race and other things as well. Any questions? All right, guys, I'm going to try and get you your papers. I'm going to go ahead and grade them pretty soon. But I'm going to take attendance now, and then we'll be done. Okay. So I'm going to take attendance this way. I don't think things are changing. All right. Close this. I'm meeting for